Absolutely. And for what it's worth, when I was writing this, two of my colleagues shared that exact same feeling about being shamed when they were in their youth group. One
Mm-hmm.
was a professor of New Testament, one was a professor of global missions. So for what it's
Wow.
worth, you're in very good,
Very
very
good
good
company.
company with
Yeah,
people who
very good
felt that
company.
way.
I'm thrilled you're here with us on The Christian Clinician, where we join faith with evidence-based medicine to revitalize your health and renew your faith. Get ready for real and informative conversations with wellness experts and Christian scholars alike to gain a deeper understanding of our faith, explore our God-given purpose, and discover how the strength of our relationship with God can impact our health here on earth. Welcome to the summer session of The Christian Clinician. I'm your host, Dr. Tanya Paynter. And before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to give a quick little overview of what the next few months are going to look like. So I've got some wonderful guests lined up. We're going to be having an every other week episode release through August and into September when we start season 4. I'm really excited for the upcoming season. We're going to be talking a lot about physical health symptoms such as anxiety, insomnia, fatigue, mood swings, migraine, things that we experience on a physical level. And we're going to be looking at the ways that we can utilize all the things that we've been talking about over the past season 3, but also looking at ways that we can physically help with our symptoms, the ways that we can incorporate our emotional, mental, and spiritual healing as part of our physical healing process, and giving practical tips and practical ways to start healing physically from some of these things that in middle age really start to sneak up on us. So I'm really excited for season 4. As we move into the summer months, it's kind of our break for between the seasons, but I didn't want to leave you with nothing to listen to. So I have some fabulous guests that I have been able to talk to. They've all authored a book so that you can do some summer reading if you'd like to, and really starting to dive deeper into some of these theological issues and ways that we can grow closer to our relationship with the Lord, our understanding of of the Bible and Scripture, and ways that we can improve our understanding of how God wants us to live and how we can live with Him. So I hope that you enjoy the next couple of months and the interviews that are coming along with it. We will continue releasing on Thursday through the summer, and it will be every other week, so twice a month for July and August. But now, without further ado, here is today's episode. Welcome to another episode of The Christian Clinician. I'm your host, Dr. Tanya Paynter, and today I am with author Dr. Mark Teasdale, president of the United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. He previously served as E. Stanley Jones Professor of Evangelism at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. Socially Awkward Evangelism, his third book, which came out on May 12th. Welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this book.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm excited that somebody who actually knows the psychology side better than I do thought there was something worth picking up in the book, because that was my big excitement, was trying to find how evangelism and psychology could kind of come and live with each other in an effective way.
And I've never read anything quite like this and how you put this together, because it's so true. I've always, up until the last few years, always thought of evangelism as like this terrible, dirty word that like I don't want to have any part of it, because I was always taught, and we'll get into this, but I was always taught that, there was just such a weight on my shoulders. It's like, oh, I have to convert somebody. And one of my favorite chapters was chapter 5, and we're going to talk about it because you share about, what our role in sharing the gospel is, faulty assumptions that we can have about sharing the gospel and who actually does the converting, and making it into some competition. But before we go too much into that, I would love for you to just share a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, thank you. So I am the president of United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. And for the previous 18 years, I served as the E. Stanley Jones Professor of Evangelism at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. And that's where I really cut my teeth on evangelism as a field of study. Evangelism is this sort of tiny little field in practical theology that allows for people to study what the gospel is and how we interact with it. Essentially, that's what that field of study is about. And there aren't a lot of us that do it, but but there's a small academy that does that, that's been around since 1974. And so that's what I've been doing for most of my professional career. The book itself came about for a couple of reasons. One is I have two children who, when I was writing it, were both teenagers at the time. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, especially just coming out of the pandemic, was watching them do this dance of figuring out how to relate to other people.
Mm,
And that was something that clued me into the idea of social anxiety, which is something that I began to explore and then see where there was resonance around evangelism. And there was a particular moment where this came to a head and really kind of got me thinking. And that's when my daughter, who was a junior in high school at the time, she grew up in a household with a theologian dad. I'm ordained as well, and so they've been around churches their whole lives, and talking about faith is nothing weird or unusual in our house. And and I had been on a podcast actually, and had been talking about evangelism. And I said to her, "Oh, why don't you post the link on your Instagram page?" And she went through this multi-day calculation of how is it that she could actually make that happen. And it was fascinating for me to watch. So I stayed out of it. I didn't push her on it. But on the one hand, she didn't want to make me feel like she didn't care that I had done this. On the other hand, she wanted to be really careful about how she was seen by her peers for putting
mm,
that out there. And she ultimately posted it, but she had to do it in this way that sort of couched it in very distinct language. So that really gave me this insight into the fact that there are people who understand what the gospel is, have grown up around it, are familiar with it, but when it comes to actually engaging other people with it, it suddenly becomes a very different animal. And so
mhm,
that was part of it. The other part is that at Garrett Evangelical, Evanston, Illinois is a place where it's a college town, and there are a lot of de-churched people that are
mm,
there. Folks who grew up in the church, but for whatever reason have walked away from it. And so there's a lot of discomfort with wanting to broach the idea of talking about your faith, especially with folks who have been there, but then decided not to be there anymore.
mhm,
And so a lot of my students will come in with a lot of skepticism toward evangelism, much like what you described actually is
mhm.
more or less the beginning of every semester I've ever taught evangelism. That's what the students are telling me. And
Mhm.
so I wrote this book in a way to address those concerns and also to normalize them, to say, there's good reason for you to actually feel uncomfortable with this. Let's try to get at that and not simply answer it by saying, well, just learn how to do it better, which has
Mhm.
been our traditional response, right? It's just learn the skills better, learn the words better you're supposed to say. And if you get that script down and you get down the right ways of presenting it, well, it's all fine. Well, in fact, it's not. And
Yeah.
so the psychology helps to reveal that. And I hope for readers will give folks a chance to say, it's actually okay, I feel this way, and there are ways God has given me to help move beyond it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that kind of led into how you wrote the book as far as how you formatted it. You have two different parts to this book. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So the first half of the book, I borrow from behavioral psychology, where I'm looking at how is it that when we're afraid that people will judge us, we can begin to move past the anxiety we have about sharing the gospel and being the object of sort of stigmatic shame coming our
Hmm.
way as a result of that. So the first half is dealing with our fear that we're going to be judged and harmed because we share. The second half I borrow from social psychology, particularly communication theory and questions of influence and persuasion. And I ask the question, how is it that we can avoid harming others? So if we're afraid we're going to harm others in the process, how can we be persuasive and yet remain ethically bound to the goodness of the gospel at the same time? And I did that in part because, saying with my students, I have some students that come from parts of the country that are very dechurched, where they felt deeply concerned that they would be judged by their peers if they shared the gospel or even acknowledged they were Christian. I had one tell me that she was actually mortified by the idea of acknowledging she was a Christian in front of her
Mm.
friends. So the first half is really for those folks. And the second half of the book is for the folks who aren't necessarily as concerned about being judged, but they are concerned about coming across as judgmental
Judging
and
others.
hurting other people in the process.
Yeah. And I think that it's none of us really have only one or the other. I think there's always a little bit of both that we're kind of wrestling with. And I just want to say that in case somebody's listening and they're like, wow, this sounds really psychology heavy, and like, I don't know, I'm not ready for a textbook. It does not read that way at all. You did a fantastic job of really breaking it down. And so it's very, very accessible. So when you're talking about some of these big words and these psychology things, I didn't get any of that feel when I was reading this book. It felt very conversational and very easy to understand, and really a lot of deep insights. And I resonated with a lot of what you were talking about. And I think that can be so helpful when we can put a name on something that we're feeling or experiencing, and then also knowing like this is a thing, as you said, like we're not alone. This is normal. And how do we work past these blocks? Well, this first step is to name the blocks, and you do that really well. And then you actually give practical steps on ways that you can start working through those. So it's very informative, but it's also very practical too. And I really appreciate when those books show you how to actually implement what you're actually trying to talk to them about.
I really appreciate that. And I have to say, one of the things I was really grateful that InterVarsity Press let me do, in addition to the book itself, there are, I think, 14 online appendixes
Hmm.
that have actual practices. People can, everything from prayer practices to mindfulness practices. To a variety of other kinds of practices people can use to be able to move through whatever the situation may be, and they're all free and they're online
Hmm.
on the InterVarsity Press website for the book. So whether you buy the book or not, you can download those and make use of them right away.
Yeah, yeah, that was a wonderful resource library. And so you brought up mindfulness, which was one thing that as I was reading through there, one of the things that I thought of, and I've had this conversation with many people, is some reluctance in the Christian community to engage in something like mindfulness or meditations or even breath work because there can be an association with non-Christian ideology. So can you just share a little bit when you talk about mindfulness? Can you just share what that looks like from a Christian perspective, and your thoughts around mindfulness, meditation, things like that, if that's okay for a Christian to do?
Absolutely. So I'll be honest. I remember the first time I came across mindfulness, and it was something that they did in these really tiny chunks in my kids' elementary school. Actually, it was something that they were piloting to try to
Mm.
get the kids to calm down during the day and sort of, be ready to learn. And initially, I thought it was a little bit frou-frou. I thought, this seems kind of, fine, 7, 8 year olds can do this sort of thing, but it didn't really seem like it made that much sense to me for, grown-ups to do. And where I think I shifted on that was when I started looking at how it is that the Bible talks about, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And that strength piece is clearly physical. I mean, that includes our bodies. And of course, theologically, we know bodies are important because Jesus doesn't just rise from the dead as a spirit, but as a body, right? The
Mhm.
body is there. And and so it's clear to me that bodies become important. And the last piece of the puzzle was that during the pandemic, when we were all reading about trauma and things like that, because that was everywhere,
Hmm.
one of the things that became just very obvious to people, and to me at least, was uh, that you carry trauma, you carry anxiety, you carry fear, not just in your feelings, but you actually carry it in your body. And that
Yes.
just made sense all of a sudden because we all have that sick feeling in the pit of our stomach, or we start
Hmm.
sweating a lot, or we start hyperventilating, or whatever it is. But there are bodily reactions to moments of fear and anxiety, and it's not just an emotional reaction; it's a physical reaction. And so it just made sense that we would be able to pause and scan our whole selves, not just our feelings, not just our thoughts and beliefs, but our bodies as well, because they help to signal for us what's going on in our feelings and what's
Hmm.
going on in our minds. And so that's where mindfulness for me was helpful, because it simply is saying, it's not meditating in the sense of I'm going to focus on some sort of deity, or try to be in touch with some sort of harmonic of the universe or whatever. It's really just being aware of ourselves in a non-judgmental way. And
Yeah.
and in doing that, we become mindful of, okay, when I think this thought, I start feeling this tightness in my chest. Or when I think this thought, or have this feeling, suddenly I notice that, I'm perspiring more than I was, or whatever it might be. And that seems to me just a very helpful diagnostic.
Hmm.
It's not about, again, it's not about accomplishing some kind of spiritual feat. It's just being aware of ourselves, because God gave us our body and linked our body to our minds and our hearts and our souls. And if we can be aware of our body, we can be better in touch with the fullness of who God created us to be.
Yeah, and I love that. And so you're defining mindfulness in the book as basically a body scan. So there's a technique called body scan mindfulness, and that's what you're talking about, is where you're just checking in kind of head to toe. Where am I tight? Where am I feeling tense? What is my heart rate doing? How deeply am I breathing? All of those things. And I think that we do such a terrible job. And I can say that because I still do a terrible job of checking in on my body as I go through the day. And I realize I've been hunched over my computer for 2 hours typing. Why is my back so sore? Well, because we're not mindful of our bodies in the way that I think you're right that we should be. So thank you for clarifying that, because I think that that's sometimes hard for you hear some of these words and they're so associated with new age or meditation or some other things, and it automatically kind of puts up that block. And so you're just basically talking about scanning the body that God gave you and understanding how it's responding to things that we're thinking about or feelings that we're having. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's it.
So, what do you think somebody would really be able to use this book for? Like, what do you see as the big two or three things, or maybe even just one issue that somebody might be struggling with, that this would be the go-to guide?
So I'd probably say it's the two, because of the two halves.
Hmm.
For the first half, the go-to guide for I'm I'm feeling anxious about sharing my faith with others, and having them, and being exposed in a way that they're judging me, right?
Hmm.
And so in that regard, it's very similar to social anxiety. In the first half of the book, I actually borrow from acceptance commitment therapy
Hmm.
as the basis of how we're talking about behavioral psychology. And I borrow from that therapy structure, especially in how it treats folks who are moving or dealing with social anxiety. And so folks that are afraid of being exposed in ways that they feel vulnerable, and are afraid they're going to be judged, that's something that I think the book both helps them name, as you were saying earlier, helps to normalize it so that they're not feeling like they're less of a Christian, or they're
Hmm.
unfaithful, or they're a bad person because they feel like that. There's good reason to feel like that. The first chapter is the longest chapter, and I actually walk through all the reasons why, in our current cultural setting, it's actually reasonable to be really anxious about
Yeah.
sharing the gospel. And
Yep.
so I
And
hope
and
that,
and not to interrupt you, but I loved how you pulled in some of the from the Gospels, some of the examples of when Jesus himself asked people that he's healed or delivered from demon possession to go out and be socially uncomfortable. Specifically, the one that sticks in mind is the man that was that he I'm stumbling over my words. Was the man that he released the legion of demons from, and
Yes.
he wanted to come with Jesus, and Jesus was like, "No, you need to go back to your town." He had a long history with these town people. They didn't like him. They didn't want to be around him. They experienced the demonic possession. And Jesus still kind of forced him back to give the testimony to those people. And talk about socially uncomfortable. Like
Exactly. Right.
I thought about it in a whole new light from his perspective, how terrible and hard, not terrible, but hard that must have been to go back and confront them.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, these are people that had only seen him running around naked for years, right?
Yeah.
And foaming at the mouth and tearing, chains apart and all that. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine how awkward he felt when he first like knocked on somebody's door and said, let me tell you about my faith,
That's
right?
right.
Um, but that's right. And I think that what I really like about the acceptance commitment therapy is that it starts with the assumption that there is no pain-free route through life. I mean, that's a big part of what we're accepting.
Mm,
And so, yes, there are times Jesus calls us into these places where it is going to be socially uncomfortable. And and that's okay,
hmm
right? Because the alternative is to avoid that, but then instead of the potential judgment we'll face from other people, what I call stigmatic shame in the book, we end up carrying this deep internal shame
hmm
because we've avoided what Jesus has called us to do.
Yeah.
And so there's no pain-free route. And what I hope the big takeaway from that first half of the book is it's understandable why you've avoided it. It's understandable why
hmm
you're feeling the shame as a result of it. Again, you're not a bad person for that. There are reasons for that. Let's examine what they are. And then there are tools to help you move back in the direction of accepting the call Jesus gave you and even being prepared to face whatever stigmatic shame might come as a result of that. So that's the first half that I really like. And at the end of chapter two, I've even got this little diagram that I was,
hmm
if you want to sort of do a sort of the speed run through the book, or at least the first half, that's where you go as the last page of the second chapter, and you can find the diagram there. The second big thing, the big takeaway in the second half of the book is, okay, now that I'm comfortable doing this, how is it that I can be persuasive and ethical at the same time? I don't know about you, but I've been to far too many evangelism workshops where engaging in evangelism is seems a lot like being a sleazy salesman, right? I mean, it's
hmm
just, okay, you want to get them to say this, or there's this sort
hmm
of tree of conversation where you're trying to pin them down with certain kinds of logic. And I'm thinking to myself, is it a real conversion if at the end they just feel sort of bullied into agreeing
Or
with
tricked,
you?
or yeah.
Exactly. And so how is it that we can be persuasive? There's nothing wrong with being persuasive, but not be manipulative at the
hmm
same time. We're not manipulating, we're not bypassing people's reason, we're not trying to just appeal to the emotions only and have them ignore what it means to actually make a commitment to Jesus
Right.
Christ.
I mean, Jesus himself didn't do that. Like we all had our free decisions to follow him or not. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and even in the scriptures, I mean, he lets people walk away,
Yeah,
right? The
that's
rich
right.
young ruler comes
hmm
up and says, "What must I do to be saved?" It even tells us Jesus looked at him and loved him, and then
hmm
said, "Okay, go sell all you have, and then come follow me." And the man walks away, and Jesus doesn't go after him to call
hmm
him back. Jesus lets him go. So
Yeah.
that's a hard lesson, but it is a reminder that Jesus isn't coercing anyone into the kingdom.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that kind of segues into my favorite chapter of the book, which was chapter 5,
Okay.
because you really talk about how well, I shouldn't say we. I was taught in the church what evangelism looked like, and it was very much like street evangelism, go knock on the doors of people. Like I literally remember doing that in youth group, and I was like, I hate this so much. Like it can't be right that I hate this much. And and so, can you just talk to that a little bit about ways that the church may be pushing us in a direction that maybe isn't quite biblically aligned? And then also that idea behind what really was a game changer for me is because I always thought, did I save a soul? And I remember being asked,
Mhm.
did you save anybody this week? And spoiler alert, we don't save anybody. And it took me so long to realize like my job is just to share my faith. It has nothing to do with conversion or gaining a soul. I didn't save anybody. The Holy Spirit's role is that. And chapter 5, you really kind of go into this and some of the different assumptions that we make that can make evangelism really hard, that
Mhm.
can make, the idea of salvation into some sort of like checklist or, even a competition. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I will, and I won't break down the whole chapter, but sort of a gloss of the
Yeah.
what I think are the big, and I give long bullet points in that chapter about here are all the different ways that we've sort of misconstrued evangelism in different directions. But I think that what they come down to is this, that the misunderstanding of evangelism is essentially there are three things going on. One is that we tend to think, first of all, it's very knowledge oriented. If you just know the right words, if you know the script, if you know the right things to say, that will get you where you need to go
Hmm.
when you're evangelizing. The second thing is that it's very skill oriented. So it's not only knowing the right things to
Hmm.
say, but how to say it, right? So if I just know the right ways to get it across, if I can just be skillful enough in how I convey that knowledge, then I can get people to say yes. And the third, and probably the most dangerous of them all, is that it's confrontational by its very nature. Um, and that's something I come back to again and again in the book, is this assumption that if we're going to evangelize, we actually have to confront somebody. There's a famous author I won't call out, but in a book, he's a historian, and in a book he writes about how evangelism is. He pictures it as two combatants that are
Mm,
on the precipice, with this narrow precipice, and they come both armed to battle to the death,
mm,
and they've got their camps of supporters on either side, and so it's the evangelist versus the non-Christian, and they're going to battle it out, and each side is cheering them on, but whoever ends up winning, that other side sort of like loses some of their credibility in the cultural reality that we're in. That's a really, really bad picture
yeah,
of
really bad.
evangelism.
Which,
Um,
to be fair, like that's what I used to think of it as. It was a battle and I did not feel equipped, therefore I'm not stepping into the ring.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And for what it's worth, I mean, I grew up with something very similar. I remember being a teenager standing on a street corner where I was supposed to be handing out tracts, and
Hmm.
I basically was trying to hide behind the far more extroverted kid from my youth group that I was paired with, so that he would be the one that was, because he would happily just talk to anyone. It didn't really matter if it was about Jesus or not. He just, and so he was passing out tracts, and I was just kind of like, all let. And I remember after that event, we were, got in our youth group prayer circle and we were debriefing about it. And I actually broke down in tears because I
Mm,
felt so ashamed that I had not been a bold witness for Jesus
hmm.
Christ out in public. Um, and no one really knew what to say to me on the
Yeah.
back end of it, which was, kind of like, well, yeah, I guess, you can do better next time, sort of thing.
Well, and I think
But
that's so important that we don't acknowledge that the Lord, the Holy Spirit gives us different gifts in the evangelical realm, right? Not all of it. And I think was it Lee Strobel, Mark Middleberg, somebody had a list of the 7 different types of evangelists, and some of them are relational, and some of them are the cold callers that can stand on the street corner and talk to people, and then some of them have to be, just sharing their own testimony. So the Lord has equipped us all with different strengths, and we need to find the way that we like to share it. And there's no one size fits all. So if someone's trying to fit you into a mold that you don't belong into, you're gonna hate it, and that is not what we're meant to be doing anyway.
That's exactly right. And in fact, so the what I like and use in teaching my class actually was something called the evangelism matrix that Alan Hirsch and Tim Catchem developed in their book Permanent Revolution, where they actually have this what is that on the x-axis is are you more or less verbal? Do you prefer to witness through deeds or words? And then on the y-axis, are you moving people to more to decision, or are you moving people more in just kind of relational engagement? Is it more of a
Interesting.
single moment of time that you're trying to
Hmm.
move them to, or are you spending time with them? They point out, and I've followed up with them on this. I talked to both Alan and Tim about this, and um, I actually created like one of those little like what Hogwarts house quizzes are you that I use with my students, and I have them go through it and do that, and then it pops out which one of these four quadrants they're more likely to be in, and
Hmm.
it's amazing how freeing it is for
Yeah.
them to say, "Oh, I can legitimately do evangelism and be someone who's not talking a lot about my faith. Not that you never say anything, right? But
Right.
I'm not talking as much." But I can do it primarily through, reaching out in acts of love, and I can do it over the course of multiple months or even years, and I can offer the witness of Christ that way. And in fact, what I point out to my students is we've got the folks who are, the Billy Graham types who are ready to just call people to faith,
Yep.
which is great.
Amazing.
But for them to do that, usually you needed someone who is quietly sharing their faith through deeds
Yeah.
over multiple months or years. And that builds the credibility for
Mm.
someone then to actually invite someone to make that big decision to follow Jesus. So we're meant to be a church. We were never
Yeah.
meant to be evangelists just as individuals, but together because we all have different parts of the evangelistic capacity
Right.
to share the message and make it a more credible witness for people to come to.
And I think it was Mark Middleberg in one of his books that said that it on average it takes 76 interactions with Christians for a non-Christian to believe, right? And some of them are conversations, some of them are the actions. Like it's not just a single moment in time. If you happen to be the last link in the chain, you get the blessing of being able to pray that person into the kingdom, right? So that's amazing, but that credit isn't to you. That credit is into all the other people that also contributed and ultimately to the Holy Spirit who led that person along that chain in the first place. So I really loved that vision. And that completely took off the stress for me when I was felt prompted to share something, even if it was just a little like nugget that I was just supposed to drop or a comment that I was supposed to share. And it seems like no big deal, but when I feel prompted, I remember, oh, I'm probably a link in this guy's chain. I need to say this. And that gave me the boldness, the bravery to kind of risk that judgment or whatever, knowing that the Lord was using me in a specific way. And that was really helpful for me to understand. Same as what you're saying too. Like it doesn't just have to be us telling somebody you need to convert. There's a whole lot of work that goes into the planting and the seed growing and the watering and all that.
That's exactly right. And one of my favorite examples of this, I was up in the Dakotas, North Dakota, talking to some of the pastors out in the really rural areas there about how do you do evangelism out here. And one of the pastors, who was dressed very much like a cowboy,
Mm,
said essentially that when neighbors would get sick, and they all have these giant farms and ranches and things out there, said members of the church will just go over that. Nobody will ask, nobody will talk. They'll just show up and they'll work their farm
mm,
and do everything. They'll get the cow's milk. They'll deal with whatever needs to be dealt with in the fields. They'll take care of the animals. They'll do all of that and get it done super early in the morning, and then get back to their own place and do what they need to do there. And they'll just take care of it until whoever it is well enough to be able
mm.
to start taking care of it again, there are almost no words spoken, but then the people who have had their farms cared for that way suddenly start showing up in church.
That's really cool. I love that. One of the other things that, coming back to the evangelism as a competition and the shame that some people feel, and this one really struck me. And so I just wanted to share this quote. It was on page 90, and it says, I have spoken to many people who tell of the intense shame they felt when they were youth because they could not report to their church group that they had saved any souls that week. And so I think when I read that, I was like, wow, I'm not the only one who felt that way or who, feels that way. So I just wanted to share that in case there are other people who feel that shame as you did, as I
Mhm.
did. I think that we can do a better job as a church in helping to equip believers who want to share their faith but don't know how. And this book is an excellent way to start to really understand the way that God made our brains to work and how we can utilize some of these techniques to really help move forward past those blocks. And I think that our childhood and youth group experiences may have a big piece to do with how we feel about sharing the gospel as we're adults. So having to unlearn some of those things that maybe weren't the best when we were young.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, when I was writing this, two of my colleagues shared that exact same feeling about being shamed when they were in their youth group. One
Mm-hmm.
was a professor of New Testament, one was a professor of global missions. So for what it's
Wow.
worth, you're in
Very
very
good
good
company.
company with
Yeah,
people who
very good
felt that
company.
way.
So, as we wrap this up, what is one practical step that you think that besides buying your book, but what's one
Thank
practical
you.
step that somebody could take this week to start living out this message that you have in your book here?
I think that the first step that I always recommend is prayer.
Mm,
Because oftentimes when we're still feeling anxious, either because we're afraid we'll be harmed or because we're afraid we're going to cause harm to somebody, and so we don't want to talk to them about our faith, we can always talk to God about them,
mm,
though.
hmm.
And so if you're not ready to talk to somebody else, again, there's good reason you may feel that fear. So don't beat yourself up. And maybe that's even the prior step. Don't beat yourself up
Don't
over
beat
it.
yourself.
Don't get angry with yourself. Don't feel ashamed about
Yeah.
it. There are reasons. Again, chapter one will walk you through all the reasons that you may not even been able to articulate that it makes sense why we're uncomfortable with this. But with that, the first step, if you want to start evangelizing, is don't talk to the person. As you pointed out earlier, it's the Holy Spirit who actually does the evangelism. The Holy Spirit is the one who transforms people and awakens them to whatever the next steps, in those 76
Hmm.
steps, the next steps that they need to take. So start by praying for them. Start by praying that the Spirit will work in their lives, and pray also for maybe little opportunities for you to be able to just take a tiny step of your own in being brave enough to say something about your faith or demonstrate something about your faith. And in that way, the prayer becomes transformative, not just for the person you want to evangelize, but for you too, with the Spirit working in both people to bring about the necessary sanctification that needs to happen.
I love that. I love that so much. And I'd also add from a personal perspective, this is not an overnight transformation. This is something that has taken me years to work into. And my prayer, what I initially started praying, because I felt that guilt, I felt the shame. I knew that he was calling me to something more and I was hiding, but I was not ready to step into any of that. And so I just remember praying, Lord, just give me some courage. Help me to know what to say, when to say it. Just help me to want to engage more. And I prayed that for probably a year before I actually felt ready to step into that. And so, anyway, I just want to encourage anybody who's listening. It's like, well, that sounds great, but I'm not even close to being ready. You just got to start with that prayer. I think that's the best place is incorporate the Holy Spirit, ask him to help you, and he will change your heart over time. He will put things in your path. You'll fail to step into those. You'll feel that conviction and you'll realize, it's maybe not so bad if I actually do it because then I won't have to feel this way anymore. And I've had plenty of those experiences as well. And then there's something just really relieving about following that conviction when you feel it, even though it's really scary and you're afraid, when you do it, and like you said, they're usually just minor little things, like just a comment like God bless you. Like that was even hard
Mhm.
for me to say. But just something small like that, when I said that, I felt like this intern, like I felt God patting me on the back. He's like, "Good
Mhm.
job. Like you were uncomfortable with that and you did it anyway, and I'm proud of you." And then that led to like bigger steps and bigger steps. And the more I kept stepping into that, I kept seeing the ways that he was opening those doors. And as I prayed for that, as you said, like he will be faithful in providing those ways to train ourselves into, bigger and better things. So yeah, this was so encouraging and I think so good for people to hear that this is normal, that there's nothing wrong with us when we shy away from it. I think it would probably be very unusual to run into somebody who doesn't have some level of shame or fear or, whatever that they haven't worked through in the past. So you see these big, bold people who are out there talking about it, and I guarantee you they've gone through a process to get to where they are. They didn't just step into it.
That's absolutely right. And just to pick up on your point that of God's faithfulness, one of my little sayings that I teach my students is miracles follow mission. When we are faithful in the mission that God has given us, that's where we see God's power unleashed.
I love that.
I think we often have thought, well, why don't we see the miracles that we saw in the book of Acts or something like that? And my sense of it is that oftentimes we think of those miracles as just sort of acts of power for their own sake, but
Hmm.
they're not. They're always as a witness, as part of the mission that God has given Jesus, who's, initially is out there as the wonder worker, but then the apostles later on. So miracles will follow mission. And if we're
Hmm.
willing to take those little steps into mission, we will absolutely see the presence of God and the power of God unleashed in incredible ways that we wouldn't have recognized otherwise.
I love that. That's really good. I'm gonna have to sit and think on that one a little bit. That was good.
Well, thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this book. Again, it's called Socially Awkward Evangelism.
It's out and available. And like I said, if you wanted to sort of kick the tires a little bit before buying it, if you go to look it up on the Ivy Press website, you can find those online appendixes that are completely free to download. So you can get several pages of it available for free. Take a look at it, see if those practical steps are useful for you, and then you can, you know, buy the book and see how they all weave
Dive a
into
little
the larger
deeper.
argument I'm
I
making.
love that. And I will have the link to that page in the show notes. So I would encourage everybody to check it out. And Mark, where can people find you to learn more about what you do? And
Sure. So I have a website. It's just my name, markteasdale.net. They can go there, and you have a very episodic blog where I look at essentially trends in culture, particularly in North America, and how that is affecting the church and how the church can be an effective witness within whatever's going on in cultural trends.
that's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And this has been just such a good conversation. I think we all need to have more of. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please subscribe for more topics like this, where we focus on bringing our faith and health together for a whole you. If you have questions around your health or your faith, including doubts and struggles with what you've been taught about God, we'd love to have you send us an email at support@psalmmedical.com.